I'm going to wait just a little bit because it's not 11:30 quite yet. How many of y'all had the opportunity to watch the movie?
I did.
I did too.
I did too.
Anybody watch the original movie about his adventure during the war?
Yes, I did. And I also read the book.
Right. I also read the book. Did not see the other piece.
I'm grateful that you read the book, because the book was perhaps one of the best books I've ever read, and I've talked to other people who were just taken back by it also.
Same
It was
thing.
terrific.
I wish I could remember the name of the author.
Laura
She
Hildebrand.
She also wrote Seabiscuit,
Gildebrand.
Hildebrand,
Right. Laura Hildebrand.
right. Remarkable ability to convey detail in a really illuminating way. I had no idea that the air war in the Pacific was as drastically bad as it appeared to be. More airmen lost, more aircraft lost to maintenance and pilot error and weather than anything the Japanese ever did.
It
Okay.
angered me greatly.
John is in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we got two. All right. Well, we'd like to get started here. I'm not one person who likes to have a prayer popped on someone. So I'm going to ask one of y'all to give us a closing prayer. Okay. If somebody could just kind of think about that.
Sure.
And I'm going to begin. I'm going to begin with a prayer that is a prayer from the third Sunday in Lent, and it has to do with evil thoughts, which of course our good friend Lenny had. Okay, Almighty God, who seest that we have no power of ourselves to help ourselves, keep us both outwardly in our bodies and inwardly in our souls, that we may be defended from all adversities which may happen to the body, and from all evil thoughts which may assault and hurt the soul. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who liveth and reigneth with thee in the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so let's discuss our movie here. Okay, let's just kind of review the fact of what happened to this fellow. He's a terrific Olympian athlete and actually shakes hands with Adolf Hitler. And in I guess it was the 38 Olympics or something like that in Berlin. And I think he came in second in his race or whatever. And he was bound to be a winner probably in the 42 Olympics, which of course didn't transpire because of the war. So he comes home and he ends up in the Army Air Force in the Pacific, and is in one of the Liberator B-24 bombers. He goes on assignment, then goes back out in a really elite performing B-24 to search in a search party for somebody, and the plane malfunctions, and he and the crew go down, and he is only one of 3 survivors. And one person dies, and they end up 47 days on the raft, and he ends up. I remember in the book, which was kind of something else, because when he is the Japanese in their publications said he was rescued by them. So he's on the island and he's under this medical doctor's care, and the medical doctor is a pretty good guy. And when he finds out that he's going to be shipped away from the island, the medical doctor is really very saddened by that, because he knows that Louis's fate is not as in secure hands as it was on that island. So he ends up being in a prison camp, and gets beat up by the bird, and evidently, refresh my memory a little bit, he ends up in Tokyo, right? Doesn't he end up in a concentration camp in Tokyo? Where
I thought it was in the mountains. I thought it was that he came back to Tokyo to make that presentation that they were going to video.
Fine. Well, anyway, one of the things was one of the funny things in one of these interviews with him. What was it? Man, am I thinking? In the movie, in the sequel, where he's telling his buddy that he hasn't eaten a decent meal in 3 years or something like that, and they fly over and drop Hershey bars on him. Remember what he said? He said, "Man, you eat Hershey bars after you haven't eaten for 3 years," and he said, "It ain't pretty."
No, that's not.
So, I thought the sequel was really good. I just watched it a couple of days ago, and I thought it was really well done. But here's one of the I googled. I saw the credits, and here's one of the things that I thought really peculiar. And I'm not really getting into the guts about what we're supposed to talk about, but I looked at the guy who played Billy Graham, and I said, man, they could have done better with a look-alike. The guy's big, and Billy Graham was kind of sizable. But I said, man, but his voice resembled Graham's voice. Did you notice that? Huh?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the credits, and there he is. The guy who played Billy Graham was a man named William Graham. That was Billy Graham's nephew, or grandnephew, I might say. I've had the opportunity to meet some people in Asheville, North Carolina. I went on a cruise type of thing or a tour to
Black Mountain Retreat.
No, I went to Israel with a tour group, and the person who ran it was a man named Wilcox from Asheville, who had his own tour place. And he was elderly, and probably in his early 80s. He was personal friends with Billy Graham, and now is personal friends with Franklin Graham. So, and I've hit it off with this guy. He's gotten to be his name is Glenn Wilcox. Well, in any case, that was a pretty neat experience. Now I hate to I'm one of these people. I will get off on a tangent if you let me. So let's get back to our movie. And here I have some questions. If anybody wants to say anything, please. But these are some of the questions that a friend of mine said. These are some of the things I could ask about. When was his life, Louis' life, really turned around?
Well, let me venture that I think he finally came to the conclusion, and it occurred about the same time he went to the revival with his wife, that he realized he was at the bottom, that he'd gone through all the steps that many people who are alcohol abusers or drug abusers go through, that finally they hit bottom and they realize, among other things, that they are completely lost in their ability to save themselves, that they are sinners, they're outside of the realm of what they would expect of themselves, and above all, to the extent that they believe in God, what God expects of them. And I think it was at that point that he really reached out to Christ, because there was nowhere else to go. And he really did want to turn his life around. He really did want to repent. But turning your life around, or trying to turn your life around, tends to be a useless exercise if you don't have somewhere to go. Up to that point, he'd rejected God. He'd rejected Jesus Christ. He'd rejected his Catholic faith, and instead doing everything on his own. And I think that was that point at which he really reached out. I was very interested in the fact that Billy Graham in the movie and the two sermons or partial sermons we heard said nothing about sin. He said nothing about Jesus dying on the cross for our sin, and that it's that action by Christ that really offers us salvation. I mean, he talked a lot about save yourselves. Jesus will save you, Jesus, but he never mentioned those two first steps. But I think my interpretation of the film was that our actor, Louis Zamperini, acting as Louis, made a very convincing argument that he did come to the end of his rope and he turned to Jesus Christ because he knew he was a sinner and he knew that he could only find help with his immediate problems and for eternity with Jesus Christ. That came across much stronger in the book, as I recall. And I also think it was sort of temporized in the first film I saw called Unbroken. Of course, you all know that. But I think that this film probably brought it out better. I think authors, and maybe less so in the book, but certainly on the movie screens, they just hate to say Jesus Christ, even when it's a religious film, or talk about sin, or talk about the cross, which is, of course, the essence of the gospel. And but I think the way the actor handled this very question that you just asked, and I'm spending too long answering, was in fact a good illustration of how the gospel bears out in reality. Let me end on that.
Anyone else have something to say about that?
Well, Dick, I was going to say that, when he came to that point where he's looking up at the stars and there's the same stars, the Milky Way, he was looking up there and he had seen it in the Pacific. Mm-hmm. And he just, and he had, in the movie, they kind of talked about how he had asked God to save him. And so now he's coming back to that, he's at that point where he needs to have, some help, and he turns to God again. And I thought that was, and it brought a tear in my eye to that, he basically was a broken man, and he had, was turning back to Christ for help.
So are you talking about the vision that he saw when he was in the raft, when he was looking up?
Yeah.
To me, that was a big point in it, when he realized how small he was in the whole scheme and scope of things, and that he was just saying, I put myself in your hands, do your will, whatever it may be, but save me. And I promise I'll change up. I'll change my way of life.
Well, when he was in the raft, at least the flashback to that moment where he's looking up at the Milky Way and he says, Lord, save me and I will serve you forever.
Yeah.
That was what it essentially said. It's sort of I don't mean to belittle it at all, but it's sort of a fairly typical foxhole prayer. Lord, just get me through this mortar barrage and I'll do anything you want me to, or words to that effect. And I don't know how many of them bear out. I've had a couple of experiences like that. Once you get back to some degree of normalcy, of course, he did not. It got worse from that point on. I'm sure he would have rather spent 47 days on the raft than he would have 47 days in that prison camp with the bird.
That's right, because he probably thought, hey, I asked for help, but you've actually made things worse. I mean, I would rather have died in many instances, and probably in his mind, than have gone through what he did.
You're right. That's one thing to undermine whatever faith he had, that, things got worse and then they got worse again. Every time he asked for help, things got worse.
Have any of you ever been to Billy Graham Crusade?
Only listened to one, old ones that we've been back, but I've never actually been to one.
Yeah,
I have. And I went to a Billy Graham Crusade in Tulane Stadium back probably in the maybe 1965 or something like that. The thing I was surprised at was big stadium, Tulane Stadium, the old Sugar Bowl Stadium, capacity 80,000 people, and I would say that there was about 16,000 people there, which was a good crowd. But I don't know. I've seen pictures of some of those Crusades, and I mean in the stadiums like Yankee Stadium where they had people hanging out of the rafters. Okay, and I did not. When he said to come down, I did not go.
Yeah.
But I mean, not many people did. But I was there, sure enough, with my girlfriend.
I went to one in the summer of 1959
Wow.
in the old Griffith Baseball Stadium in Washington, D.C.
Oh my.
How long ago it was. And I had just graduated from high school. I was young, and a bunch of us went just for the sake of seeing Billy Graham. And I don't remember, you know, whether it's jam-packed or what, but the thing I remember and was curious about was when he gave the invitation, you know, there were people that just streamed down there, like you know, we would see in the ones on TV and that sort of thing. And I thought about that when watching that part of the movie. Of course, that I don't know when that was, but it was more of a tent revival sort of thing. But you know, it's amazing how many lives Billy Graham changed with that. And I don't think the, you know, TV evangelists that everybody likes to disparage even come close to being as sincere as Billy Graham was, and changed his life.
I'll throw something in here for you, because this is in my discussion with the person that gave me some guidance on this class, who had watched the movie, said that when that person asked me, when did I think that he had turned his life around, I thought that the beginning of it was when his wife had gone without him and come back and said that, you know, before she left for the meeting with Billy Graham, she told him that she wanted a divorce. She went and saw the Graham thing, and she came back and said, forget what I said, I'm with you all the way until the end. And she said, I don't want the divorce, I'm with you. And she also told him somewhere along the line that that don't forget, if you keep on going like you are, that little baby over there will be embarrassed. Someday she's going to bring a man home that she's going to want to marry, and her fiance is going to be looking at a drunk in the face. Something under that order. Okay. And so I think that really got me thinking. So you've got one person who's gone to this evangelical ceremony, the wife, she comes back with this news, and she's been changed because she has now, in a sense, forgiven him. And that, in that sense of forgiveness, is the beginning of why he ends up attending the Graham event. Okay, I've got a question for you. Okay, and this is something I thought of. I'm sorry. Golly, I should turn that thing off, huh? So I wondered about something. The events of life, you know, how we get put in different situations, we get placed in front of different people, and sometimes we don't get placed in front of the people that maybe make a difference or whatever. But just supposing when he was running around that track, and he had already run a 4-minute 9-second mile, and he was trying to go after a 4-minute 7-second mile. Okay, and he came around the final turn, and he messes up his ankle. which puts him out of commission. He can't run any longer like he did before. So if he hadn't messed his ankle up, what do you think would have happened? He may have gone on to win the Olympics that year. So he wins the Olympics. Everything's rocking along fine. But he wouldn't have hit the bottom in order to make this movie. All right. So look at it. You can look at it that way. I have the greatest admiration for people. I told a friend of mine, I love to read books where there are heroes involved, where people just hit downright bottom, get placed in places they never even dreamed they wanted to be, and they become victorious. And I've read a bunch of World War II novels, not World War II books, that I really like. Survivorship. I've met World War II veterans that have been in camps in Germany, and my father's one of his closest friends, although I didn't appreciate it at the time, was a Bataan Death March survivor. And I mean, I knew him, and I've always looked at him, and I'm talking about back when I saw him back in the 50s and 60s, he was always thin. He was just one of the skinniest people. I don't think when he came back, he didn't gain much of his weight back. And I just love reading about these people who can have been through those experiences. I kind of crave it a little bit. So anybody else have anything they'd like to say about that?
I think that many of the veterans, if we can just put them into a class of folks who have been through really serious combat, and there is always a lasting effect afterwards. I know very few people who come home from sustained combat over a long period of time who aren't really affected by it in some way and have to go through not only an adjustment, but a recovery from what they experienced. And it can be as simple as things like a man I knew who came back from Korea, the Korean War, who was virtually frozen. It was so cold that he spent the rest of his life, he always wore socks, and he wore a skull cap to bed every night. His wife couldn't get him to take off, what I'm saying is like a stocking cap and a pair of wool socks, because his feet were always cold. His head was always cold in his memory, and he just couldn't break the habit of doing it. I mean, they had a very satisfactory marriage, and they had a very satisfactory life in every respect, except for that stocking cap and those socks. He had to put them on every night before he got to bed, no matter how hot, warm the house was. So I think everybody brings a little something back. Disabled American veterans does a lot. You don't hear much about them these days. It's all Wounded Warrior projects and things like that. But disabled American veterans, I've been told by somebody who worked closely with them and really knows, and he's a veteran himself, said that they have probably the best awareness, even before it became a big thing on the public scene, about the kind of traumatic experience people have and the PTSD that results. And their contention is that everyone who has been in combat to one extent or the other suffers from some degree of PTSD. Some hardly noticeable, some obviously very public and spectacular in a bad sense. So and I think that's true of people who go through any kind of experience of that sort. I've often wondered how race car drivers, these NASCAR drivers, get through what they do. I don't know if any of you all have ever seen the film Ford versus Ferrari, but it's a very, very interesting story of Carroll Shelby, Henry Ford II, Ken Miles, who was a driver, and the experiences they had over about a 10-year period in the 60s when the the Shelby Mustang was developed, and Henry Ford sort of sucked it in and went to Le Mans, which was an incredibly difficult race. 24 hours in France on unimproved road, not unimproved, but just normal public roads, not on a track. And it always amazes me that those fellows stay as normal as they do, given what they devote themselves to every week or every 2 weeks in the course of a year. I guess I'm going on too long about that, but I think that to some extent, on a far lower scale, all of us, to one extent or the other, have periods of time when the stress is pretty tough, and even with some of us, it marks a signal point about how we're going to live our lives from that point on.
I might add a little something to that, and I'll just share with my experience. And this is not something I'm looking to be someone say, have praise upon me or that I'm gloating in my whatever. But in 2020, that wasn't 19, it was 2016, I was en route from New Orleans to Birmingham, Alabama, which was going to be my midpoint en route to the mountains. And I was going to meet my daughter. To make a long story short, I know I was going 70 miles an hour because I was in a work zone. I was supposed to be going 55. So I thought it'd be a good idea to bring my speed down to 70. I normally go about 77. And there were no workmen around. It was one of those things where, hey, you're in a work zone, but 70 miles an hour was fine. And I can remember passing a vehicle, and it was a 4-lane highway, I-59, going up, and I was in the right-hand lane going 70 miles an hour, and I think I had my cruise control on, and I was just minding my own business. I said, wow, I don't have anybody in front of me to have to pass. I can just kind of relax here for a little bit. The next thing I heard was a crunch, gigantic crunch, and my car is getting lifted up in the rear end and getting turned around, and I didn't know what had happened. All I did was I looked down out of my window down to the left-hand side, and I saw something dark down there. The next thing I knew is I was tumbling. I didn't know where I was. The car was flipped at least 8-9 times. Bam, bam, down the grass in the middle of the 2 highway lanes. And I didn't know what had happened. What I saw was my interior of my car was gray. What I saw was nothing but like the screen that you and I used to see on television. We're old enough, the black and white static on the TV screen. That's what I saw until, and I can remember after a while, after a few flips, the car started to slow down in its rotations. And I thought to myself, good, I'm beginning to slow down. I ended up upside down in the car. And my first thought was, make certain you get out of here. If you're ever going to do anything right in your entire life, get the heck out of this car, because you might catch fire. So I undid my safety belt. And the next thing I knew, I was on my knees, kneeling on my roof of my car, the interior of my roof. And I thought to myself, I looked up and pressed the button for the window, thinking that maybe it would open. And the window opened from the ground up, and I crawled out. My hands touched the grass, and I said, wow, you made it. And this is my first thought. I walked around that car once, and I looked at it. It was upside down. This other person had run me off the road, and they had flipped off I'll call you back. I don't know why that is not supposed to ring. In any case, I ended up upside down, and I walked around my car. I saw somebody else whose head flipped also. I was confused. I was dazzled. But I walked around, and I thought to myself, wow, Dick, you are something else. Me. I did that. I got through it. it was like one of these, like I survived cancer. No, people, not without some help. And it wasn't but a minute later that I thought, hey, it's by God's grace that I'm standing here in front of this car and I'm surviving, I'm on my feet. And what happened later on is another story. But that's when I realized, hey, I had people tell me, Dick, after the scene in that car, what it looked like afterwards, God placed you here. God got you through that thing for a reason, and that's one of the reasons I'm here with you guys this morning. I've got some little purposes here. So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
What an event you have just described, because you were out of control. You had no control of what's going on. You realized after the fact, had it not been for God's grace, I may not have survived that crash. That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's right. I think you're right. I mean, I had some I had bruises on me from the amazingly, I had where my bruises were, and I didn't discover them the next day. My shins were just black. I looked down at them, and they didn't really hurt that much. And I looked down, my shins are black, and that was from my shins from my legs hitting the bottom of the dashboard over and over and over and over. But we can move on. I just wanted to kind of share that with you because we've all had close calls, but that was the one that kind of brought me to realization that maybe we ought to start giving the Lord a little extra time.
Amen. Well, I think one of the things in the movie that was most impressive to me, and I appreciate y'all's views on it, was the fact that he went to Japan essentially to find the bird. But what he was looking for was not a chance to take revenge, but a chance to forgive him. And instead, he wound up talking to that room full of Japanese prisoners, and going up to each one of them and saying, "I forgive you and I forgive you." That was clearly staged, but the point was that's what he did. That's what he did. In fact, as I remember the book, he did find the bird, and he did forgive him face to face, but the bird would not accept it.
That's right.
He stayed as stalwart as ever, and his disdain for Zamperini and the same sort of attitude, and would not accept Zamperini's offer of the gospel or Zamperini's offer of forgiveness to him. But it certainly turned his life around, didn't it? When the Lord forgave him, he was able to forgive, and his wife forgave him, and all the people that were important in his life, his brother, who loved him and sort of looked after him all this time, prayed for him, helped him any way he could, tried to keep him on the straight and narrow, even when he was going through his drunken episode. He was forgiven by everyone, and it empowered him to forgive those who had harmed him the most.
I always thought it was interesting. I had some friends whose father served in World War II in the Pacific, and they said that dad would never buy a Japanese car. When the Toyotas and all of those became very mainstream in the U.S., they said, it'd be a cold day before they ever would buy a car made in Japan.
Yeah, my father-in-law had served in the Korean, and I can remember descriptions of those damn Japs. He never got over it. He never got over it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a man who I met 2 or 3 years ago on the trip that I took for the 75th anniversary for the D-Day invasion. Okay. And this is one of the people I told you about that I met who had been a POW in Germany. All right. And his name is, you might write this down because you can Google it and it's really interesting. I think you can get this on on his website or whatever, the Harold Frank story, Frank story. And the title of it is From BAR to POW. And the BAR, you guys probably know, is the Browning automatic rifle. Okay. And he was a young kid when he went over there, and gets captured by the Nazis and gets put in prison camp. But he's a North Carolina guy, and I think hopefully he's still alive today. I spoke with him over the phone. When I met him on a cruise ship, because he was on the cruise ship with us for this D-Day event. And if you remember, Trump went over and they had all these, for the big event, and the Prime Minister of France and Trump addressed the crowd, and all the veterans were behind the speakers and so forth. Well, this guy was something else. He is he's like one of the premier citizens now of North Carolina, and he spoke at one of the race car events. Okay, but one of the things he said in front of all the NASCAR drivers that had talked before the race in the North Carolina race what they had a few years ago, he got up in front of them and said, "Listen, I was a German POW a POW in Germany, and I forgave those people. When I got back to the United States, I looked at some of the survivors of what had happened in the Pacific." And he says, "I never could forgive the Japanese for what they did." And right in front of him was the Toyota race team. So, I mean, it kind of was supposed to have struck some people pretty funny that happened. But why don't you Google this guy and listen to what he has to say? And he has an amazing story. And he doesn't even tell a fraction of it on this DVD that I have. But Google.
What was his name again? Frank? Was it Howard?
Harold Frank, Frank. He carried a bullet around in his somewhere in his back or shoulder or someplace like that, and he had this bullet lodged in him, and they put him on, outsourced him from the prison camp to go to a factory owned by a German citizen. Okay, and the German citizen was not a Nazi, but he was just doing the work, and had his workers, doing the war effort. And Harold was there working in the place, and this manager, the owner of the company, took him under his wing and got him out to a doctor to have the bullet removed from him. And it was a German doctor, and he said he'd never had so much pain. He said that bullet felt worse coming out than it did going in. And he carries the bullet on a chain around his neck. His wife passed away a few years ago, but he's just a remarkable man. If you can't, if you can't pick it up on the internet, I'll be happy to try to share this. My wife can maybe find a way that we can download this compact disc and get it out to you, because I don't know how to do stuff.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Thanks.
Sure. The stories are all over the place. We have a resident in Cashers who I've gotten to know, and his name is Paul Hilliard, and he's a veteran of the Pacific and a remarkable man. He was a very, very short in stature. I mean, in makeup, he's a very short man, and they needed short people to put him in the back of these Dauntlesses because there wasn't much space back there for the radio man gunner, and that's what he was. And he told me one day I could talk to him. I didn't want to go over any boundaries, but he told me, he said, "Dick, let me tell you something. I was one of the luckiest guys in the war. The entire time I had a tent to sleep in. When I came back from my sorties, whatever, we'd come back, we all would sit down, have a nice dinner, and sleep in our tent." He said it was great. No problem. really, and he's a very knowledgeable man. He's like in his probably 96 years old now, and just lives his main part of his life in Lafayette, Louisiana, and he was the chairman of the board of the National World War II Museum. So he's the real deal, you know. Gets around a little bit.
You know, I think about how hard it is, well, speaking of myself, to forgive somebody that wronged me in some way, whether I think they misrepresented something to me, outright lied to me, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I had somebody like that in my life that I finally forgave. And it was because of, you know, hearing all the sermons and reciting the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And that was, and in the scheme of things, it was something trivial, but I just wouldn't speak to the person for a long time. And when I finally said, look, you know, we got to get this right, that was the biggest sense of relief. And I mean, that was something in the scheme of things, not important. But the courage that it took for Louis, you know, who was haunted by this all this time, everything he went through to go over there, look for the bird and forgive him. You know, number one, that is one of the supreme examples of forgiveness. And secondly, I just wonder if that did not really make a difference in his life. If it was a big burden, you know, carrying a grudge is a hard thing to do. And, you know, it makes us think, my gosh, if he could forgive this, shouldn't we forgive people who, you know, we get irritated at because of something far, you know, more trivial than that.
I had, and you know, what you say is very, very kind of intriguing to me. I've had one person that I cannot trust, okay? Or maybe I could trust them today if I try to re-enter and just reach out a little bit. That new term, reach out or whatever. But the way I got through mine was I just said, hey, this guy is dangerous, shouldn't be around him. If I came back, he'd try to take advantage of me again. And the only thing I could do was forgive him and just say, look, this thing's, you know, I'm not here to judge anybody. The guy really probably had an extremely bad child upbringing, which causes this mental, and I just said, look, I'm not going to judge him. That's not my job. If I'm not in the judgment business. I'll let the Lord judge. So that's how I kind of got around this particular situation, which is not, you know, his problem might not be answered. You know, maybe I'm supposed to go back there and say, hey, let's, but I don't think it's, you know, that's like stepping into the danger zone, man. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Well, I think the main thing is to let it go, not let it bring you work.
I'm okay now with that. John, there's a good looking foot you got there or something. I don't know. There we go. We'd have to find out what mystery part that was. Maybe you can.
Oh, my thumb.
All right.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Let's see. You know, one of the things, if we've still got, you know, 17 more minutes or whatever, or how long y'all want to make this thing last, but I have entered into a course. It's by the Order of St. Luke. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of it, but it's a healing ministry. And the course, I went through this thing and I looked back at one of the gospel readings that they had from Mark and Luke, and it was the man with the unclean spirit. And I think that maybe apply a little bit to Louis, okay? And I'll just read it to you. It comes from Mark, the first chapter of Mark 21 through 28, and also Luke 4, 31 through 37. And unless somebody else has somebody they would like to add, I can go this way.
Oh, go ahead.
We really talking about this movie. Okay, they went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as teachers of the law. Just then a man in the synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," says Jesus sternly. "Come out of him." So Jesus said sternly, "Be quiet. Come out of him." That's what he said. The evil spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. The people were also amazed that they asked each other, "Who is this? A new teaching and with authority. He even gives orders to evil spirits and they obey him." News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. Okay, I just want to go back to here and try to relate this to Louis, okay? And it was the evil spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. Well, I didn't see any real, I saw pain in Louis. And I think when the evil spirit really came out of him was when in the movie, when he was walking out the second time of the Billy Graham Crusade. And there he was, and he envisioned the bird out there in the crowd. And he said, "Look at me." The bird said, "Look at me, look at me." And Louis turned around and went back in. So that was the turning point, I guess, of when Louis, when the evil spirit was actually leaving Louis. And in my study, we talk about the difference between demonized and mental illness, and they are totally different. You know, someone could go have a mental illness and have mental sickness, but somewhere along the line, an event like alcoholism may be they may call it an illness, but I may not want to do that because that's territory of which I am not familiar. So that's a subject. But the demonization and mental illness are different. And the people have been teaching me in these courses have actually witnessed people who have been demonized. And I don't think I've ever seen one or knowingly seen one, but they have. And they say this evil stuff is the real deal. So, I mean, that was, I think Louis was really exposed, and he was really demonized. He was. And he turned to alcohol, which didn't really, probably didn't, did what I would have done, probably, Maybe.
It's hard to put yourself, you can't put yourself in that position. That's in a territory that none of us have ever been through, something like that. Or how do you can't guess how you're going to react on the other side once you're through with it.
Yep. Anyone else have any comments or?
Well, you could argue that in this particular man's life, that I guess in everyone's life, we are always subject to the scripture in the epistles of Peter, in which he says that Satan is like a lion walking around seeking whom he may devour. And of course, the demons are his minions that carry out his purpose, which is to destroy us, destroying us by really drawing us away from the salvation offered in Jesus Christ's sacrifice and God's intent to bring us back to him whole and clean. And it could well be that the demon selected the bird as a vehicle by which he would get to Zamperini and continued to plague him until the time came at the end of that second service when he was able to reject the demon, or Christ in him did it for him, because at that point he had turned his life over to Christ. And, you know, greater is he that is in me than he who is in the world. And he finally had the Spirit of Christ in him through his acceptance of Christ, and Christ rejected the demon.
Good thought.
Devil stronger than us, but Christ is stronger.
Anything else? Anybody got a tea time?
I've got one comment, if I may,
Please.
make about these World War II aircraft. It's sort of on the point, but maybe not. You can be the judge. I have a good friend who's a long life aviation enthusiast, and one of his good friends was a doctor who was very successful and made enough money to buy World War II warbirds. And he flew them virtually all of his life after he had finished his service in the military during World War II. In the days after World War II, you could buy a Stearman biplane for $300. You could buy a P-51 for $1,000. That was a lot of money, I guess, in 1947, but not as much as you'd pay for a P-51 today, which would be about $2 to $3 million. But anyway, he flew warbirds for a long time and became involved with the Warbird Association of the Experimental Aircraft Association. And they would go to these various events where they'd fly their airplanes for parades and so forth. And over the years, they would meet. And then finally, about 10 years ago, he stopped flying. And his friend said, "Why'd you stop flying?" He said, "Well," and he told them about these meetings they would have, and the group of pilots that were about 50 when they got together in the early 50s. Now, when they sit around the table, there are only 6 of them. They said, "Well, where'd the other guys go?" Virtually every one of them had been killed in a crash of their warbird. Might have been a Corsair or P-51 or P-47 or some kind of military aircraft. And as they put their heads together and began to discuss it, they realized that those airplanes were built to last 5 years, no longer. And here they were trying to fly these planes for decades. And he said, eventually they give way and you lose the airplane and you also lose your life. And that's why their group is diminished, and all of them swore off flying. Now, there may be other groups of people who do fly them. He said, but to do it properly, you've got to have a team of mechanics. You've got to have a warehouse of spare parts. You've got to have an intensive inspection program, which most people can't afford. And unless you have that behind you, you're not going to have the same success. And even then, at the end of 5 years, which went by a long time ago, you've got problems ahead of you. And that, in fact, was the problem of the Green Hornet, which was the B-24 that Zamperini and his crew took out. If you'll remember, it was almost a hangar queen, and they were out looking for another aircraft that had gone down.
That's right.
And, you know, there you go, B-24s.
They call them flying coffin.
Well, close to it. They didn't fly very well once they lost power. Where they went down pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. They had a steering wheel in those things that were just gigantic. I mean, to move them around. I don't know. All right, well,
Thank you, Dick.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Thanks a lot, Dick.
Thank Dick.
Great movie.
Thanks,
Great
Dick.
movie too.
Appreciate it.
John, thanks for, John is normally our guy, I think, in this thing. I'm happy that I was able to help out for one of my favorite books anyway. And here's,
Yeah.
hey, here's to Louis. How about that?
Good.
Okay. Does anyone like to lead us in a closing departure prayer? Amen. All right. Love you guys. See you. I'll see you in the
Thank you,
next along in the maybe the next
Thanks,
next
Dick.
week.
All right. See you guys.
God,
Bye-bye.
God bless you. Bye-bye.